You're listening to the Flex Success podcast, where we teach you how to be less shit.
I'm your co-host Lizzy, and this is Dean. We'll be covering all topics relating to health, fitness, and bodybuilding.
Join us as we use our in the trenches experience and up-to-date science to provide you with information that you can actually use.
If you like what we do, be sure to give us a like, follow, share, and tag us on social media. Oh, there's a cracker for you guys today. We were just testing our mics and we were like, why isn't mine working? Hadn't turned it on yet. Then we couldn't find the record button, but we're here. And we're here with a quickie today because we always hit you guys with long episodes. And you know what? Quickies are nice now and then, aren't they, Dean?
I mean, I would say yes.
So look, we'll see how much we ramble, but we're going to aim for like a 20-minute episode today. And we're going to talk about the idea that, people always say, if you want to gain weight, you got to eat more. If you want to lose weight, you got to eat less. But there's some misunderstanding around what that really means, and people get it wrong, and we're going to help you get it right and have an easier time gaining, losing, whatever you're trying to do.
Right? You hear it all the time. This is a common mistake. So.
Yeah. All right. So let's get straight into it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Straight
into the quickie.
Straight in.
A difficult task sometimes.
Look, I feel like I've warmed the audience up with a quick introduction, so we can just get straight in.
They have been lubed.
Oh, so much innuendo. I'm loving it. Absolutely loving it. Okay. So, Dean, maybe you can talk to us about the distinction between eating more food or less food and eating more calories or less calories.
Yes, with the understanding that calories are they are what is dictating or energy balance, more specifically, whether or not you gain or lose body fat or even muscle.
And so by balance, you don't mean just what we're eating, it's also what we're expending.
Correct, yeah. Now, it seems like a logical thing to think if I put more food on my plate, that will generally result in it being higher calories. And therefore, if I eat large quantities of food in volume, that I may otherwise then experience weight gain. I feel like it's a kind of like a logical expectation.
Or in reverse.
In reverse.
If I put a small amount of food on my plate.
Yeah. That I'm going to be eating, far less. But we see it all the time. There's a clear distinction between the volume and the quantity or the grams, how much space food takes up in your diet versus how much energy it provides.
And calories or kilojoules would be another way of saying energy.
Energy, yeah.
Yeah.
And for anyone that's listened to us before, they would have for sure heard Liz talk about like high nutrient density and high energy density foods. So HEDs, you may have even seen them on some of our posts on our Instagram. So high energy density foods are those foods that gram for gram have a very high calorie content. So
these dense in energy.
These are things that may be like small in size and volume, but large in energy.
So obvious ones would be like ice cream, oil, butter, chocolate. But then there's less obvious ones because people think of like healthy foods. Therefore, healthy foods must be low in calories. Wrong. It could be things like salmon, avocado, granola, nuts,
acai bowls,
orange juice.
Plenty of things. Obviously, inverse to that would be to be low energy density. And then these would be things that you can fill up your plate on, but they will otherwise provide you with very, very, very low calories.
Coke Zero, vegetables, fruit.
I don't know if anyone's going to pour a Coke Zero out on their plate.
I actually get so full on Coke Zero.
Like vegetables, vegetables, fruit, and lean proteins are probably great examples of those across the board.
Or even like sugar-free jelly. We don't want to be filling up on that, but it's an example of a low nutrient, low energy dense food.
You mentioned Coca-Cola. I mean, we've got a sugar-free monster here.
What flavor is it, Dean?
Watermelon, ultra watermelon. Now, actually, for the visuals, the people that aren't seeing this but are listening, it's a 500 milliliter can. So the volume of this can is 500 milliliters. Yet the calorie content of this can is only 10 calories. Now, if I went and got the original Monster, the Big Daddy, the one that's filled with sugar, it's actually going to have roughly around about 60 grams of carbohydrates and 250 calories. So 10 calories per 500 mils of volume versus 250 calories per 500 mils of volume. A great representation of same volume, significantly more or less calories depending on what you choose.
Right. And so one's not better than the other. If Dean was trying to lose weight and therefore he's likely to be more hungry, he doesn't have as many calories to consume within a day. I avoided the word eat there because you can also drink your calories. then it would be better for him to go sugar-free. But if Dean was trying to gain weight, and God, he takes a lot of food to gain weight and it's uncomfortable to eat that amount of food, it might be more appropriate for him to choose the full sugar version, because it's the same amount of stuff he's putting in his body, but it helps him actually reach a calorie target that's difficult to reach. So it's not like you should always choose a sugar-free version. It's just not the case.
And you mentioned that, I like that terminology, like more appropriate. I think foods, when it comes to this, and even this discussion, is more appropriate, less appropriate choices depending on the goal. Like this monster that we're talking about here is not necessarily an appropriate choice specifically for a better health outcome, in that it provides no vitamins, no minerals, no nutrients. We're talking solely here in regards to like weight and body composition management. Then we can talk about the volume here, and that you could eat more volume and less calories and lose weight, or you could eat less volume and more calories and gain weight. Although there will be some things in there that will probably by default mean you'll eat more vitamins and minerals, i.e. through fruits and vegetables. It's not always the case, but for the point of this conversation, when we're talking about having the capacity to eat more to lose more, we're talking primarily about high nutrient density foods, low energy density foods.
Yeah, sure. I mean, okay, let's think of what we think of as a typical American diet. Fast foods, ultra processed foods, they're good examples of how people can consume far too much energy, because, you know, they're if we think of a typical American, we think very overweight, but they're undernourished. They're not eating enough nutrients. Void in protein, void in fiber, micronutrients, right? Plenty of fats, plenty of carbs, you know, not exactly complex carbs, not exactly great sources of fats.
No.
So we can have too much of one and not the other. And we can even have an excess in micronutrients. You know, think fat soluble vitamins, for example. Our body does have a storage system and we can have an excess, but not enough energy. So somebody can be underweight and can be unhealthily underweight, but have lots of nutrients. So really we want to have a balancing act of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just really, I think where there's a lot of confusion is you'll hear this thing said frequently. Oh, I started losing weight and I was eating so much food. I've never eaten so much food in my life. And yet I was losing weight. It's like as if my metabolism was just dormant and asleep. You know,
I wasn't eating enough before. Yeah.
So like two things. One, you're probably eating more volume of food because you've eradicated or at least reduced the amount of high energy density, ultra processed foods. So the quantity of your food on your plate has gone up through fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, etc. You are eating more food in grams, but you're certainly not eating more food in calories, because if you were,
you would be gaining weight.
You would be a very unique individual. We would want to study you intently, because you would be breaking the laws whereby humans can
laws of physics. Yeah.
You know, so if you're losing weight and you're eating more food, you're still eating less calories.
Yes. So it's not about the food, it's about the calories. And okay, now we should probably also caveat here that this isn't just for people trying to lose weight or just for people trying to gain weight. I think about this every time I think about what to eat, and I'm not trying to gain or lose weight. I'm trying to maintain my weight, which I have been doing successfully since
to infinity and beyond.
It's about the last 5 years, maybe. I was at a weight that I've been happy with, and I've maintained it within 1 kilo, which is quite like a natural range of fluctuations for my body weight. I'm 59 to 60 kilos for anyone who's curious. And I do this by thinking, how hungry am I right now? And what are my overall calorie needs, more or less, right? Because this doesn't have to be an exact science unless you're in a comp prep, and then it does weigh your herbs. It's more or less. So if it's that week of the month and I'm absolutely starving, I'm probably going to double the vegetables on my plate. I'm definitely going to go for potatoes or pumpkin, for example, so that I can have a mountain of it, my lean protein, whatever it is. Whereas if it's a week where, you know, I'm not feeling particularly hungry, but rice would be nice right now. Rice would be nice right now. Bit of a tongue twister. I might choose that because I'm only able to have, you know, significantly less for the same amount of calories, but I'm not really that hungry. So it's not a big deal. I'm just going to go for it. So this isn't just for people after weight gain or weight loss. This is also for people who are like, you know, more or less wanting to maintain their weight within a tight range. And that works as well. And we can, when we know what our energy needs are, when we know what food is composed of, and what our personal preferences are, you know, hunger is one way we can look at personal preference. then we can use this really wisely. And these are actually the 3 pillars of informed eating, our first book. Knowing your personal preferences, understanding food, and understand, did I say personal preferences? Understanding your personal needs, understanding your personal preferences, and understanding the composition of food. And for people who are like, well, how do I even get to know what is in what food, how energy dense something is, what are the carbs and fats? Macro tracking isn't for everyone, and it's definitely not something we would recommend everyone do for the rest of their life, but it's a great way to learn what foods are energy dense and what foods aren't. And it's not like a light switch. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Foods exist on a spectrum of energy density, or think about calories per 100 grams is another way to say that. Things aren't either high or low unless we're talking about water and oil. They exist somewhere in the spectrum. And things that are high for me would be considered different for somebody else, because my body weight is really low, 60 kilos. And in order for me to maintain that, I need to eat less than somebody who's trying to maintain their weight at 100 kilos. So if they're trying to eat relatively low energy dense foods, they could choose from foods higher up on the spectrum. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's been the greatest thing that I've ever learned. And also, I think even clients for me have learned, is just being able to then make, hence the name informed eating, an informed approach to their food choices. I think if you're somebody who is willing to track and weigh food, you can actually probably eat very energy dense and nutrient dense foods and still lose weight. But you have the choice, and you know that at least mathematically you're doing that. It's probably you're gonna probably be hungry, but you can do it because it's a very measured approach. It's calculated.
There's those few weirdos that just don't get hungry, right? And so they could go for the salmon and the nut butters and the avocados.
Yeah, or it's just that they just prefer those. They find those foods more satiating from a flavor perspective, so they don't need the volume, right? Whereas like for individuals like yourself and myself, who are now living in this perpetual state of maintenance where we're not actually like measuring food from a calorie perspective, but we do know our personal preferences, we do understand food, etc.
We're estimating.
We're taking an informed approach to certain meals to make sure that they are both voluminous enough, also nutrient dense enough in macros, and then similarly calorie controlled to a degree. Yeah. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on what we did prior. Right. And just to give an example of this for people just quickly, like I've had a prep client who's about 3 or 4 weeks out from a show just now. And he was eating white potatoes, standard like red skin white potatoes. And I think he was eating 250 grams in 2 meals. And I wanted to make a calorie cut, and I was looking at his food. I was like, gee, he just doesn't have that much food to play around with. So what I did was I shifted out the 250 for 150 of spud-light potatoes. Okay. Because they're 9% carbs instead of like 11 or 12, the ones he was using. So we gained back about 6 or 7 grams of carbs. Ooh. They're, it's like on free Tic Tacs. No, but like on a per 100 gram serve, that's 7 or 8 grams of carbs. Okay. And then I traded back in pumpkin, which was even lower again. So he ended up actually maintaining his 250 gram starch carb serve. Right. But he was down in carbohydrate total energy density by about 10.
And the same amount of fiber, which is
by about 10 in each meal. Okay. And then I just picked up a few other things, like even little things like he was eating a lot of carrot and beetroot. And they're like the higher carbohydrate vegetables, not ones to worry about for anyone, but for the prepper, sure. And we just shifted them to like zucchinis and mushrooms. Right. Okay. And the dude's diet actually gained weight and volume, but it dropped calories by about 5%. So there's a way you can manipulate energy density to your favor if you want to feel fuller, despite the fact that you're eating fewer calories.
Love it. For those that want to know, like, well, what's the difference? Sweet potato, 14% carbs. White potato, depending on the type, about 12. Pumpkin, 7.
Spud Lights, the special potato, are 9.
Right. Carrot, 6.6% carbs. And when I say percentage, this is total grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams of the food. And I'm talking about raw weight here. And then beetroot, gosh, I'm forgetting.
Beetroot's like 8%, 7-8%.
Right. Zucchini's like 2.2.
All your vegetables are usually like sub 3, minus corn.
Which beetroot, is really a starch.
Yeah, corn, beetroot, and carrot. They're the only 3 that are really
they're not non-starchy veggies. So
exactly. But I mean, of the traditional vegetables that people think of.
And then mushrooms are actually 4% protein. And I think the carbs is less than a gram.
Oh, that's broccoli.
Oh, okay, right.
Broccoli, 4 protein, 0.4 carb.
Yeah, but the details don't really matter. Like, we shouldn't be nitpicking, as Dean said. This is just for a prepper. And I'm just rattling off these numbers for those that are interested.
But it's great because then somebody can go, oh, maybe I'll choose strawberries over choosing mango.
Yeah, right.
You know, because I could eat 4 times the quantity of strawberries in weight. Not that we would suggest you do so.
No.
Then you do mango. So point being here again, you can eat more food and lose weight if you eat more food from lower calorie
eat
density.
more food to lose weight.
Yeah.
Help you stay full.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fullness is one of the things we're going to touch on next. I think it's perception.
Right. Okay. So if people are dieting to lose weight, because I guess you could always diet to gain weight as well, but let's say we're dieting to lose weight specifically, it's normal eventually to feel a little hungrier because of the changes to our leptin is one reason. It just means that we have less of a hormone within our adipose tissue, our fat, that signals to our brain that we're chubby and happy because our bodies want to be chubby and happy to avoid starvation in a famine. So we have less of that as we lose fat. We have less of this hormone, and therefore we just feel a little bit hungrier more often. But that doesn't happen straight away. But if people reduce the volume of food that they're eating too quickly, then those feelings of hunger can come on much faster. And so one way to reduce that is by eating more volume of food, right? To fill our stomachs up. But if people perceive that they are hungrier than what maybe they actually are, or that their hunger hormones suggest they're hungrier than what they actually are, then they're more likely to overeat later because they're just trying to kind of soothe themselves of this feeling of hunger, because being hungry perpetually is quite uncomfortable, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You would know. And if people feel like, oh gosh, I'm just not eating much, I'm so tired, they're going to move less, maybe subconsciously, maybe even consciously. They're just going to skip a gym session here or there. And so what happens when we reduce feelings of hunger is that it's just easier to keep doing what we're doing and to keep moving more and to make the gym, and we're going to get better results that way. And with results comes motivation to continue. So not only do we get further, but it's just easier to do so. And I mean, life has enough struggles, doesn't it? Why add more?
Yeah, not something I'd recommend.
And, you know, even with this tool of making sure that we're having appropriate food volume for your goal and your appetite, there's still going to be challenges. We're still going to have temptations and days where we have to work late and it's hard to get to the gym and we're tired and, you know.
Yeah, like you've got the physiological considerations, like you mentioned, like leptin and so on. You also have like a mechanical, physiological, like consideration, which is the amount of food in the stomach, sending some feedback mechanisms to the brain to say it is full, which is what you mentioned as well. That is one of the advantages of higher volume, lower calorie foods, is that sort of it plays that card for you. And then there's also even just the psychological perception of this being difficult, and that then making it more difficult for you to adhere to it. So like we can try and minimize how restricted we feel by having some food variability, some things we like, but also having a sense of like physical fullness, then it is likely the case that you'll probably find that there's less like resistance to the dieting process because it becomes kind of easier. Like I know I can have periods where I'll have a really large volume meal and I finish and I'm like, geez, I'm sure I've overeaten there. Like, I think I need to pull back on my next couple of meals. And then I sit back and I go, hang on, what did I actually eat? Oh, I just ate like a fairly good serve of protein. I ate a lot of vegetables and I had a piece of fruit. Oh, actually, if anything, I probably underate on calories in that meal. So yeah. The perception to me isn't that I'm under eating. It's actually that I'm enjoying my food because I do enjoy my food, but I'm choosing appropriately.
The word that's ringing over in my mind is something called cognitive restraint. So this is the feeling that we've restrained ourselves from eating more. And we know that the amount of cognitive restraint that we exercise is not always parallel to the results that we get. Somebody could be setting up their diet in a way that it's really easy to eat approximately in a line with their nutrition goals, their calories and their micronutrients. And it's pretty easy for them to continue and it's not much effort. And then there's somebody who might feel like they're really trying super, super hard and they're always resisting temptation and flexing their willpower. And, you know, occasionally they'll quote unquote slip up, but God, they tried really hard. Their results might be worse because they just have more temptations around them. They're eating such high energy dense foods that they're still hungry after a meal. So it's about reducing this cognitive restraint.
Yeah, and also like, why not reframe this into the idea that like being excited for finding new things to consume that are enjoyable, as opposed to being annoyed or pissed off at the things that you now have to, remove.
Yeah.
Because I know that's certainly something that I've enjoyed with moving from a tracking perspective where I was just considering the protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and then moving to like a meal approach where I think like, what will I enjoy? What does fill me up? What is calorically controlled?
What gives me
And can
protein?
I make this pretty delicious without having to worry about like adding the nub of butter that they suggested? Like
Right.
maybe I could try a thumb's worth of butter, and then I'm like, oh, surprise, surprise, a thumb's worth of butter was enough. But I find excitement in it, so I don't ever really feel like I'm super restricted. I'm just finding different opportunities to enjoy my food. I think it makes a massive difference because then it doesn't feel like I'm doing something I don't want to do.
Case in point, Tuesday night's dinner.
Yeah.
I cooked to a theme on Tuesday night, breakfast for dinner. And I thought, okay, what can I make within this theme? I got like unsugared cornflakes and I crushed them up in a Ziploc bag. The theme was breakfast for dinner.
I don't think you said it, did you?
I think I did.
Oh, man.
Not listening.
I must have been enjoying my monster.
You're too into your monster. Yeah, Ziploc bag. Anyways, I, just like you would make schnitzel, coated the chicken in flour, then in an egg wash, and I just used egg whites. And then I coated them in unsugared, crushed up cornflakes, and I just put them in the oven. And that was pretty low calories. And it was delicious. It was like crispy chicken strips.
They were honestly legit.
A few spices in there, like paprika, salt, pepper, whatever. Yeah.
I was going to say shout out to Timmy because he actually hit me up on Instagram and went, mate, that actually looks fucking legit. And I said, I know, I'm a really good cook.
You didn't make it.
No, of course. He knows that. He knows I didn't because you put on there that you were the cook. So,
yeah, but the point is that there's really delicious things we can make that aren't going to send you over the cliff of calories. Of course, it takes a little bit of creativity and you can't just like duck into KFC. Maybe a bit more planning and preparation as well, but it can be done. It can be done. And there's things that you can buy that hit the mark for nutrition and for energy as well. Some pretty great, it depends what country you're in, so I'm not going to go rattle them off, but some pretty great pre-made meals that you can buy. Think about some guidelines.
It's just simple. Just go for the slightly lower fat option to start with, you know? And then maybe from there you might shift a little bit more, like a sausage is a good example.
Okay.
Like you can get super delicious sausages that aren't the most fat laden sausages you can get, you know.
There's plenty of 15% fat sausages.
Yeah, you know, there's so many options.
Yeah. And it's probably worth also keeping in mind that just because it's called the health halo effect, the marketing says it's healthier or it's gluten-free or something like that doesn't mean that it's actually better for weight management. It still might have the same or even more energy than just like the regular version. Case in point, those like veggie chips, you can get like potato and beetroot and sweet potato and all that. They have the same calories as Twisties. Like, I'm not saying go ahead and eat Twisties, although there's nothing wrong with Twisties, but check the label. Don't just assume because something is gluten-free or it has the word health on it or something like that. That it is better. Read the goddamn label, not the marketing.
It's very frequent that gluten-free is also fat laden because it's got no gluten and it's got no fun. I have to put some other fun back in, you know.
God, I love gluten. It's what makes things elastic and delicious.
Like,
how funny. Shit is gluten-free pasta?
So English jokes that don't translate to Spanish-speaking countries. That is the sarcasm of gluten is good for you. I remember we were recently the other day, we were talking to somebody and they were doing, oh yeah, and it's all gluten-free. And you went, but I love gluten. Gluten's great for you. And the Spanish-speaking individual there was like,
she had no idea.
She was like, no, yeah, good joke. And I was like, doesn't hit the same here.
Doesn't hit the same. But of course, there's reasons why people might want to go gluten-free if they have like non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or you actually are celiac. Fair enough. But yeah, I think people confuse these kind of like health labels with lower in energy density. Read the packet. And if something doesn't come with a packet, by the way, you should be comparing foods per 100 grams. You can go to calorieking.com.au and, you know, type in the food that you're after, like a whole food.
Yeah.
And there's a little thing that says for one serve is this amount. You can put in grams, 100. Look at it that way. You know, easy peasy.
What else we got?
Last point, because this is just a quickie. How long have we been going for? I don't even know.
Don't know.
It's not just about food volume. So the last 2 points are this. Even though we can manage hunger, it's always a good idea to not be afraid of it. sometimes you're going to be hungry, particularly at the end of a fat loss phase. Sometimes you're going to be hungry, particularly right before a meal, because it's been some hours before you've eaten, and that's just how our hunger hormones work. They work on a clock. And it's not an emergency. It's important to just breathe through the hunger and realize this is just a sensation that I'm feeling right now. Nothing bad is going to happen. And I think as somebody who, Dean, I'm looking at you, has done a prep with extreme hunger, because anyone who's done a bodybuilding prep knows, you can't escape it.
Nope. You can embrace it though. I used the word or the terminology reframing before. I think reframing otherwise typically negative thoughts with an opportunity, seeing them as an opportunity for success is always a good idea in these instances. Like, you know, like hunger to me was a representation of the fact that I was successfully losing the weight that I needed to. I always would be cautious of the fact that if I'm hungry all the time, maybe I need to look at my food choices. But it certainly was never something like, oh my God, I'm hungry. Like, what can I do about it? What can I do about it? It was like, oh, I'm hungry. Yeah, cool. I should be. Oh, the job's getting done. What else can I worry about right now? Is there anything else that I need to do that's more important than worrying about my stomach? And there was plenty of things.
Yeah, and I mean, also managing not just the food that you're eating, but your food environment. Like, how many visual cues do you have to eat around you? Are you just like looking at food porn all day on your Instagram? Like, unfollow those accounts, like things like that.
Yeah, I think anytime that you can minimize the amount of focus you have on food in a period whereby you're trying to cut calories to lose body fat is a smart idea.
Yeah. Hey, before I get to my last point on palatability, talk to us quickly about somebody who's trying to gain weight. They're so full all the time. Like, what are some good food choices for them?
I mean, you can somewhat invert the whole concept of this conversation thus far, and that you can go for energy dense foods as opposed to low energy dense foods. But the other thing, I think the biggest thing with the guys, there's two things that I think people really struggle with in weight gain phases. And this is both guys and girls. I have been fortunate enough to have some girls that have struggled with appetite, which is it's just novel and fun. Because I mean, good on you girls finally get to overeat, you know?
Yeah.
Number one would be palate fatigue. And that would be understanding that if you eat the same type of food, or even the same textures of food repeatedly over and over and over again, you can become fatigued of that to the point where it becomes very difficult to consume them. And the problem with that is that if you're not looking forward to it, you then are going to have a decreased digestive capacity and everything starts to get a bit messed up. So consider different senses and different textures on a per meal basis. So like a fantastic one, the one we mentioned at the beginning, is like a high calorie, but otherwise, you know, health halo affected food is granola. So like maybe you might do like, say, like a sweet yogurt with a granola. It's got some crunch, it's got some sweetness, it's got some fats, it's got some carbs, it's got some proteins, kind of got it all.
Okay.
Or it would be like eating your typical savory meal, like a rice and vegetable with soy sauce or something, and then finishing with something sweet like a muesli bar or something like that, or a glass of juice. The other one, which I've alluded to within that conversation, is that too many people pull out fiber from their diets. Now, you don't want a ton of fiber to the point where it backs you up, but you certainly also don't want to be reducing your fiber to the point where you don't get consistent movement of that food through your GI, because a GI that is stuck because it doesn't have enough fiber to go through is a slow GI, and that means you're not going to be able to get the calories in.
And you're going to feel heavy.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you're getting in enough insoluble fiber, and typically that's going to come from like a lot of your vegetables as well as soluble fiber. But similarly, it'll also come from like things like seeds and
legumes,
grains and legumes. Things that also have like a husk on them is usually good. Like corn, we mentioned that's a great option.
Chickpeas.
So, chickpeas. I think seeds are a great one too, because they typically are difficult to break down because they are insoluble, and they'll shift through the GI there. So
shift what?
The poo-poo.
The poo-poo. Okay.
If anybody knows that YouTube clip,
they eat the poo-poo.
Eat the poo-poo, please comment
below. Just put that into YouTube. Eat the poo-poo on YouTube. It's very funny. Okay. Last point on palatability. We spoke about food volume at length, and it's worth mentioning here as our very last point, that the more delicious your food is, the easier it is to eat more of it. So if you're having a really hard time eating enough, make your food more delicious. It could be that you're choosing a mixed macro meal, you're mixing carbs and fats, it's easier to eat more of. It triggers the reward centers in our brain and we want to eat more of it. Or it could just be using a little bit more salt, more spices, maybe baking it, giving it some crispy edges, something like that. And the opposite is true if you're trying to find ways to make eating less easier without having to flex your willpower all the time, which we highly recommend. And that would be things like using less salt and spices, maybe just boiling your potato instead of baking it.
Tasty enough.
Tasty enough. We still want to enjoy our food, but we know that when we eat really palatable foods that we find really pleasurable, we get hungry sooner and we have more frequent and intense cravings. Whereas if we eat food that fills us up, it's good enough, we can forget about it until it's the next meal.
I just did this. Every morning I make my breakfast, I think, oh, what else could I put in this to make this a bit tastier? And then I'm like, probably nothing, because then I want more of it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's it for the quickie. We hope you enjoyed it. I don't even know if it was a quickie. I haven't been keeping my eye on the time, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And see you in the next one.
Peace.